Joining us now, Dennis Horak, former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the former head of mission to Iran. Thanks for being with us today, Dennis.
My pleasure.
We just heard moments ago from Iran's ambassador to the UN, and he described the last 48 hours as war crimes and crimes against humanity. What do you make of that characterization?
I wouldn't expect the Iranians to say any different. The reality is it's a war, and it's destruction, and they're facing an existential crisis, and are appealing, obviously, for the international community to somehow intervene to try and de-escalate the situation, and that's the protest, the narrative that they'll be pushing, both at the UN and on social media and other platforms that they've used in the past.
Trump has called for the Iranian people to rise up, that this is, quote, the hour, that it is upon them to make the regime change that hundreds of thousands have been asking for as they filled the streets in December protesting the regime. We haven't seen that happen just yet. What are you anticipating will happen next?
It's really hard. It's one thing to tell them to rise up and take control of the government, and they certainly, the Americans and the Israelis have hollowed out the leadership. But I don't know how you get from that to them, the streets, the people in the streets taking over the government. I don't know what that looks like. The Iranian institutions are resilient. There are still lots of forces, lots of people with lots of guns still there. So I'm not sure what that looks like. I think the Iranians are smart enough to know that, you know, if there is going to be a rebellion, if the people are going to go from the streets to the corridors of power, a lot more is going to happen between now and then. What that'll look like, I don't know.
The Islamic Republic does have a succession plan in place, given the recent killing of the supreme leader, Ali Ayatollah Khamenei. What does that look like?
Well, the Ayatollah was 86 years old and he was ill, so they would have had a succession plan in place for him for some time. They also knew there was always a risk here that there would be attacks, and they certainly knew since June that they were vulnerable and they were in a weaker position. So they would have had contingency plans, both in terms of the broader leadership, the various ministries, as well as the Revolutionary Guard and other key institutions of the government would have had succession and government continuity plans in place. There's a rather complex constitutional process to replace the supreme leader. Involves an assembly of experts and others. It's drawn out, complicated. Suffice it to say that they have a process in place. How they're going to do this and face the risk of further attacks on them, I think logistics are going to be a bigger problem than anything else. But all that being said, it's the country, as I mentioned, is institutionally resilient, and they will do what they can to sort of present this image that despite what's happened, that they are still in charge, that the regime is still there, that the government is still functioning, and to a degree, that'll be true.
So you're saying that the Islamic Republic has a succession plan in place, but what isn't apparent is what the plan is from Israel and the United States in terms of launching a military attack against a country, and then the question of what happened next. You wrote a very compelling op-ed that has been published this morning asking that exact question, drawing parallels to what happened with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. What do you see playing out next?
Well, that's the big question, because it is hard to say. You cannot just tell people to go and rise up. It does. I don't think it can work that way. We haven't had any examples of succession. Regime change by the air, and that's sort of where we are now. I don't know that anybody knows what the real objectives or what the ultimate objectives are of the Americans and the Israelis. What's the point? What's the criteria that needs to be met for them to turn around and declare victory or mission accomplished? We don't know it. I presume they do, but to expect the Iranians are just going to somehow magically take this opportunity to take control. I don't also believe that there's a viable, unified opposition out there that can step right in and take control. So there is considerable potential for chaos.
Whose mission do you really think this is? They're calling it a joint mission, Israel and the U.S., but do you think one of them was clearly the leader in making this happen?
I don't think so. I think there have been in discussions about this for some time. They worked relatively closely together in June during the 12-day war. This seems much more coordinated. It had been building for some time. The U.S. had been putting assets in the region for some time, initially perhaps for increased leverage on Iran during the negotiations, and then I think they just got fed up with it. The Israelis certainly would saw this all as an opportunity to try and deal with Iran once and for all. They've weakened them considerably over the course of the past 2 years. Iran has been a threat to Israel basically since the founding of the Islamic Republic. So this was an opportunity with its various regional proxies weakened, its air defenses weakened, its military capabilities weakened, and negotiations that the Americans seemingly concluded were going nowhere. So I think it was a bit of a perfect storm, a perfect opportunity for both sides to deal with what has been a very destabilizing force in a very volatile region.
To your earlier point, this has been an attack from the air thus far. Regime change rarely happens without boots on the ground, and this morning both Trump and Pete Hegseth sort of skirted the line about whether that could happen. Are you anticipating a U.S. military force on the ground in Iran?
I would be very surprised if they had a force of any size on the ground. That is a recipe for being bogged down for a longer war. They may have assets, special forces assets, things like that on the ground, or they may introduce them at some point. But to have a force of any size that could really tilt, perhaps, for example, a revolution, I would be extremely surprised at, because of the risk of getting bogged down, and I don't think Trump has the patience or the appetite for that.
Dennis Horak, former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the former head of mission to Iran. We appreciate your time very much.
Thanks for having me.